If you still think it's summertime, the next election might take you by surprise. That especially goes for this year's primaries happening right after Labor Day on Tuesday, September 4th. If there's less interest this year in the competition for governor and U.S. senator, there's an abundance of local races. These will go a long way to decide everything from local legislators and representative in Congress to the new district attorney for Suffolk County. To tell us why people in Boston should get out to vote is the director of the Racial Justice Program for the American Civil Liberties Union of Massachusetts, Rahsaan Hall. Thank you very much for being with us, Rahsaan.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
At the ACLU, and this is not just in Boston, you have a special focus on DA's races. Tell us about that.
So the National ACLU is committed to a smart justice campaign that is dedicated to reducing incarceration across the country by 50%. And one of the ways that we are endeavoring to do that is through focusing on one of the most powerful people in the criminal legal system, and that is district attorneys, one of the most powerful persons that people don't even know about or rarely talk about. And so in many of the affiliates like Philadelphia, like Kansas and California, we have been engaged in local public education campaigns to raise awareness about the difference that district attorneys make. And so here in Massachusetts, back in December, the ACLU of Massachusetts launched our What a Difference a DA Makes campaign.
Well, most people know DAs put people in prison for high-profile cases, but what about the cases you wrote about in the blog about people who were brought in for nonviolent drug offenses?
We received some data from Suffolk County for the years of 2013 and 2014, and there were about 24,000 charges in the year of 2014. Of those 24,000 charges, 96% of those cases were district court cases, lower level offenses. So only about 800 cases were prosecuted in Superior Court in 2014. And so that says a lot about what's actually happening, what's actually being done in the name of the taxpayers and residents of Suffolk County. It's not the things that grab the headlines all the time, but it's the operating after the suspended license, or trespassing, or an argument where somebody shoves another person in order to keep control, the police arrest somebody, or resisting arrest because somebody wasn't respectful to a police officer.
I know in drug cases, one concern about people who are using drugs is that once they're locked up, their treatment is sort of shut down, right?
Right. That's the problem with taking a criminal law approach to what is clearly a public health crisis. For so many law enforcement officials to say that this is a public health issue, we still pursue the same tired, failed criminal law approaches to this war on drugs. And so, like you said, people who have substance use disorder or are struggling with addiction get arrested, and oftentimes because of poverty or because people believe that that's the best way to get them treatment, they are locked in a facility and held sometimes on bail and can't get access to the treatment facilities or can't get access to programming. And that's separate and apart from the lack of resources that are available to deal with people who are struggling with addiction. And I honestly feel that if we locked fewer people up for this issue, we would have more resources to divert people to treatment.
Well, you've been spotlighting the issue, and so has the Boston Globe. You asked the candidates what they thought about this, and what was the response like from them?
For many of them, they acknowledged the scourge of the opioid crisis and felt that it was a significant problem, but there weren't many that were willing to take a bold and progressive stance that say that they would not prosecute low-level simple possession crimes. Some of them wavered on whether or not they would repeal or push for the repeal of mandatory minimum drug sentences. And so we sent questionnaires out to all of the candidates and all of the incumbents throughout the state, but specifically in Suffolk County, and we have this available on our website at dadifference.org, the answers to some of those questions that people can go and look at for themselves to find out where each candidate is on those issues.
Now, you also had some other organizations with questionnaires as well who were participating?
Yes, Citizens for Juvenile Justice that are concerned around juvenile justice reform. They sent out questionnaires to the candidates and created a voter guide. So we put that on our website, on our resources page, as well as the Boston Area Rape Crisis Center. And so both of those are on our website, on our resources page.
What about mandatory sentencing? I certainly heard some differences. Some candidates are across the board against this for nonviolent crimes, and some of them say that there were some that we really should still have this for.
Right. And I think there are a few candidates who have said they will absolutely fight to repeal mandatory minimums and not pursue mandatory minimums on drug cases. The problem with mandatory minimums is it's a one-size-fits-all approach that is heavy-handed and does not address the real problem. And so it's important for people to realize that in order to reduce incarceration and provide more access to treatment for people, there has to be some discretion that is allowed to the judges that can make an unbiased, impartial decision about what is best for an individual after hearing both sides. And mandatory minimums stand in the way of that. And historically, district attorneys have been the ones to push for that, to make sure that that tool is always available, because 97% of cases are resolved by guilty pleas. And the easiest way to leverage a guilty plea is with the power of a mandatory minimum sentence.
Speaking of temptations to bias, one thing I learned from looking at campaign statements for all of the candidates is the people who are involved in criminal justice who are giving money. And I don't just mean police. I mean, you have defense attorneys and other kinds of attorneys, and maybe they all know each other, then they know the people they represent in court sometimes. But I mean, doesn't that give one pause?
It absolutely gives one pause. And I think there was a recent blog post by a local activist named Bobby Constantino who looked at campaign contributions for the candidates and compared that to the Mass Inc. report on the geography of incarceration that showed the segments of Boston where there are the highest rates of incarceration and the communities that have the highest policing activity in them, and showed that there are candidates that don't have any campaign contributions from those communities. And I think that speaks to some of the concerns that people are raising around this race and why it is important to have representation, especially when we're talking about the issue of whether it's police accountability or fair and accurate and equitable representation across the board through this district attorney's office when we're trying to reduce incarceration and have more people engaged in this process.
Another thing, the importance of just being, regardless who wins this, if the DA sees where votes are coming from, no matter who they're going to, isn't that important too?
It is, and that's also the nature of politics, right? When campaigns go out to do canvassing, they knock on the doors of the people who are most likely to turn out, and that's one of the things that our campaign, our public education campaign, has been proud of, is that since we're not endorsing candidates, we're not supporting any candidates, but we're educating the public. We've targeted the communities with our canvassers that have the lower rates of voter turnout, but are most likely the communities that will have the highest incidence of contact with the police or be impacted by the decisions and the policy of the district attorney's office. And so it's important that those people have a say. That's one of the reasons why we had the candidate forum in the Suffolk County House of Correction, because the people who are there are the most likely to be impacted by the decisions of a DA's office.
What was your impression of that?
It was amazing. It was historic. I think it was genuine and sincere, and it was very powerful to see people, men and women who were incarcerated, ask questions that were rooted in their very real lived experience that challenged the candidates to grapple with policies that impact the people that were there, but could potentially benefit society. We talk about reforming, and there are people who have fears about how you reform a DA's office. I just looked at the Philadelphia crime statistics, and it shows that overall violent crimes are down in Philadelphia. And this is after Larry Krasner, the district attorney who won there, prior criminal defense attorney, implemented a very progressive reform approach to criminal law. So the fear mongering around we need to keep people safe by locking up bad people, it just doesn't bear out.
What about bail? We don't usually pay attention to that, except in a few high-profile cases. But for some of those less, newsworthy cases, is that important?
Bail is tremendously important. The ACLU is proud to partner with organizations like the Massachusetts Bail Fund, and Families for Justice's Healing, as well as other organizations, to really shine a spotlight on what's happening with bail, because it has such a disruptive effect on people's lives. People lose their jobs, they can lose custody of their children, they can suffer from not being able to receive the treatment that they need, oftentimes just because they are too poor to afford bail. The Mass Bail Fund has bailed bailed people out that are held on less than $500 bail. And in 50% of the cases that they have bailed people out, over 1,000 cases, 50% of those cases ended up being dismissed. And these are people who are presumed innocent, not having been proven guilty, people being detained pre-trial. So it's really important to have an honest conversation about bail, because the only purpose of bail is to ensure that people come back to court the next day. And by and large, people do come back to court the next day, even without a large bail amount on their head.
Harley, one more time, we should let our viewers know about the website with links to all of this.
Yes, it's www.dadifference.org, and it has a wealth of information on it. I encourage everyone to look at it and go out and vote on September 4th.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Rahsaan Hall from the Mass ACLU. We'll have more news in just a moment.